We've done it, guys. We've finally done it. They said we were crazy, that we'd lose our minds before we even finished, and that such a feat was utterly impossible. But we proved them wrong. Indeed, today's Worst Games of list is a unique one. It's a special, nay, monumental moment in YouTube history, as once we have shared the 10 entries that lie before us, we will have documented every single one of the very worst games from 1990 to the present day. For the final time ever, or at least until 2022 is over, we'd like to remind you of the rules. A game qualifies for one of our Worst Games of lists if it was released in at least one territory in the year in question, and received a minimum of 7 professional reviews. We get all of our review scores from GameRankings and Metacritic, and where the game has differing scores between the two, we go with whichever is lower. I'm Ashton from Triple Jump, and here are the 10 worst games of 2018. Number 10, Shaq Fu, A Legend Reborn, PS4, 35%. There are some game franchises that start out great but go downhill after a few sequels. And then there are others, like Shaq Fu, that were never great to begin with. You may recognise this series from our Worst Games of 1994 list, where the original title rocked up to the party with a dismal score of 44.5%. Clearly, Shaq Fu, A Legend Reborn took one look at the shenanigans of its predecessor, loudly declared, "Hold my beer," and then proceeded to poop on the host's rug, much to the disgust of everyone else at the party. I think we can dispense with the party analogy now. The beat-em-up saw the 7'1" Shaq returning to save the world from the Black Star Ninja through the clever use of Kung Fu. Sadly, the silliness of the premise wasn't reflected in the actual game, and critics found that the humour fell flat, and in some places was downright offensive. Things weren't much better if you looked beyond the writing, as the gameplay was generic and repetitive and the art and sound were less than stellar. To most, the game was a complete joke, but to those who backed it on Indiegogo, it was a real roundhouse kick in the teeth. Number 9, One Piece Grand Cruise, PlayStation 4, 35%. By 2018, VR technology was really starting to take off, and a number of titles like Beat Saber, Skyrim VR, and Resident Evil 7 VR all proved the medium was far more than just a gimmicky way to get people to shell out hundreds of dollary dues on yet another peripheral. As with any medium though, there was still some tosh, with One Piece Grand Cruise being a prime example. The game was based on the long-running manga and anime series of the same name, and plonked players down onto a pirate ship in order to fend off an attacking kraken or enemy vessels. I'd like to say there was more to it than that, but alas, there was not. In fact, most players were able to experience all that One Piece Grand Cruise had to offer in just 30 minutes. As though the short runtime weren't bad enough, Grand Cruise suffered from repetitive and unchallenging gameplay. The artwork wasn't too bad, and fans of the anime might have gotten something out of seeing their favourite characters in VR, but the chances of even that were slim. Grand Cruise? More like Booze Cruise? You know, because the execs must have been drunk when they greenlit this nonsense. Got 'em. Number 8, Super Seducer How to Talk to Girls, PC, 35%. We cover a lot of games on this channel that are offensively bad, but it's not often we come across one that's just downright offensive. Super Seducer How to Talk to Girls is one such game. The title stars Richard LaRuina, a man who's made his fortune by teaching men how to pick up women, and presents players with a series of FMV scenarios, during which they must pick the correct things to say to a series of ladies, most of whom look like they want to be left alone. The whole thing is cringe and sexist from beginning to end, painting women as objects that just need to be given the right passphrase in order to dole out sex. The scenarios are horribly written and badly acted, and LaRuina gives such terrible advice that we're genuinely surprised that he's married. We can only assume he doesn't follow his own advice. Since LaRuina's advice is so awful, here's some free dating tips from love guru Ashton Matthews. If you want to talk to a girl, try treating her like a normal human being. Because, plot twist, she is one. And if you see someone reading by themselves in a cafe, leave them alone. Number 7, Past Cure, Xbox One, 34%. Over the course of our worst games lists, we've seen many titles that had some good ideas that the devs have been unable to execute. And Past Cure is yet another. Past Cure tells the story of Ian, an ex-soldier on a mission to uncover the truth about the military experiments that were done to him, which endowed him with supernatural powers. He's able to slow time and manipulate his surroundings through astral projection. Though every time he uses his abilities, his mind becomes more and more detached from reality. On paper, the game sounds great, but all of Past Cure's ideas were implemented poorly. The sanity meter mechanic could have been cool, but the problem was that the game never really dished out any consequences for allowing it to deplete. The story was also poorly written and dialogue was stilted, and the voice acting was just atrocious. The gunfights fared no better with critics, who felt battles often lasted too long, and contained NPCs who could take your eye out from 1,000 paces, and the stealth sequences weren't any fairer either. With a more experienced team at the helm, Past Cure could have been decent, but instead, it ended up being just another title with too much ambition and not enough substance. Number 6, Agony, Xbox One, 34%. Sometimes you come across games with bizarre titles that leave us wondering exactly what the devs were thinking when they bestowed their creation with such a moniker. Other times, we find that a title perfectly befits the game to which it's attached. Agony is an example of the latter, on account of the fact that it's excruciatingly painful to play. Agony follows a lost soul who has been trapped in hell without any memory of his former life. He has the ability to control others and possess weak-minded demons, and must seek out the Red Goddess in order to escape his infernal prison. There were many problems with Agony that caused critics to give the game a severe tongue lashing. For one thing, it was riddled with bugs, and not the kind that one might expect to find in the fiery depths of hell. Furthermore, its stealth system was atrocious, and considering that stealth was really the only way to successfully avoid the various beasties roaming the landscape, that didn't really fly with critics. Perhaps the worst thing about Agony, though, was that it relied wholly on shock value. The trouble with that, though, as one reviewer pointed out, if things are constantly at 100, they cease to stay surprising for very long. Number 5, Fantasy Hero Unsigned Legacy, Switch, 34%. What's that I see over in the distance? I think, yeah, it's support! In 2014, Fantasy Hero Unsigned Legacy was released on the PS Vita to a middling score of 59 out of 100. 4 years later, the game was ported to the Nintendo Switch, and luckily for players, the devs had made several improvements to the title in order to make it more enjoyable. Oh, who am I kidding? The Switch release scored even worse than the original. I don't know why they bother. Fantasy Hero Unsigned Legacy was a typical JRPG fare. The world is in ruin after monsters known as the Decoders have all but wiped out humanity, and players take on the role of the hero, who, along with their pals, swoops in and saves the day. By all accounts, the Switch version of the game was essentially the same as the PS Vita one, but critics seemed less willing to give it any sort of pass. The story was boring, the combat felt unfair, and the characters seemed like they'd been copied and pasted from a generic RPG creator, which is definitely a real piece of software. In short, Fantasy Hero Unsigned Legacy wasn't broken, but it certainly wasn't worth players' time either. Number 4, Gene Rain, Xbox One, 32%. There are a plethora of third-person shooters out there, which poses a couple of problems for devs trying to create a new one. Firstly, you've got to make something new and exciting, so as not to get lost in the sea of other similar titles. And you've also got to make sure the gameplay is flawless, lest ye be compared unfavourably to games that do it better. Sadly, Gene Rain nailed neither of those things. Gene Rain is set sometime in the future in the midst of a war between humans, robots, and hybrids. Players take on roles of characters from each of these factions, and the ultimate goal is to... Actually, nobody seems to be sure because the plot is so nonsensical. A convoluted narrative could have been forgiven if the rest of the game was up to snuff, but as you can probably guess, it wasn't. Gene Rain suffered from poor localization and even worse voice acting, sluggish and often unresponsive controls, and myriad glitches. On the plus side, it was only about 4 hours long, though most critics agreed those hours could be spent doing something infinitely more interesting, like, I don't know, filing your taxes or something? Number 3, Ark, Survival Evolved, Switch, 29%. When we first told James that Ark Survival Evolved was one of the worst games of 2018, he went on a violent rampage. Luckily, we were able to calm him down by telling him it was just the Switch version that rated poorly, and the whole debacle was resolved with minimal casualties. In terms of premise, Ark is a game of the survival variety, and players must roam the open world in search of materials which they can use to craft a base, weapons, or anything else that facilitates staying alive. No, not that one. Oh yeah, and there's dinosaurs too. On all other platforms, Ark garnered good review scores, earning 70 on PC and a very nice 69 on Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Still, it's impossible to deny that the game had some, let's say, technical inadequacies, and on the Switch, these problems just seemed to amplify. Players found that in handheld mode, the resolution of the game was so low that it was basically unplayable. And though things improved slightly when the console was docked, Ark was still plagued by slowdowns. Ark on any other platform is a great game, but we must ask that you save yourself a world of pain by avoiding the Switch version like the plague. Number 2, Wild West Online, PC, 29%. We're sorry to say that Wild West Online had nothing to do with the outstanding 1999 movie Wild Wild West, and was instead a crappy Red Dead Redemption ripoff. If it had been some sort of tie-in with Will Smith's finest work, it probably wouldn't have fared much better with critics, but it might at least have had some catchy tunes. Prior to its release, many gamers believed that Wild West Online was going to be a lot like Red Dead, only with MMO stylings. Sadly, what they got was an unfinished mess of a game with little in the way of actual contents and tons of microtransactions. Let's start with the character creators, shall we? It's rather fair to say that the devs shouldn't have bothered, as players could select one of 5 faces and choose to have hair or be bald. That was it. Once the actual gameplay began, things got no better. The PvE was basically non-existent as there was barely any content within the game, and the PvP was wildly unbalanced as high-level players were thrown onto the same server as newbies. A Western MMO isn't a bad idea, but Wild West Online was about as much fun as Dysentery. And number 1, The Quiet Man, PlayStation 4, 27.15%. If you're a video game, then making the claim that you're story-driven is a risky one. For The Quiet Man, said risk didn't pay off, and the title ended up being critically panned. The game focuses on Dane, a young man whose mother is killed in an accident when he is young, after which he invents a plague doctor-like character called the Quiet Man. Several years later, Dane serves as an enforcer for his friend Tay, and the Quiet Man stalks and later kidnaps Tay's girlfriend, leading Dane to turn true detective and try and track her down. The USP of the Quiet Man was the fact that Dane is deaf, and therefore the game had little sound and no subtitles. If done right, it could have been a great way to tell a story, but the execution was bungled, and so players just ended up having no idea what was going on. Not only was the storytelling amiss, but the combat was banal. There was no variety to the enemies, and the graphics were painfully bad. It's for all of those reasons, and probably many more, that The Quiet Man earned itself the title of Worst Game of 2018. Huh, we did it! All the worst games! Oh, I just need to do one more thing. Ben, the writer wants to know if she can come out of the cage now. Right, I'll tell her. Sorry, Kat. Ben says you have to stay in there until you've done all the best games too.